You are standing in a market where freedom is sold by the pound. The air smells of cardamom, sweat, and iron. Above you, the sun is so bright it turns every chain into a thread of light. And for a moment, it's hard to tell which men are slaves and which are merchants. Before we descend into the sands of Gujarat and the story of the man who would flay a sultan alive, take a breath. Where are you watching from tonight? Delhi, Cairo, London, Lahore. Every empire leaves its fingerprint somewhere, and this channel has become a map of them all. If you love tracing the secrets behind history's monsters, make sure you're subscribed, because tonight we begin with a slave whose silence would one day bring down a dynasty. The year was 1296. The salt wind off the Indian Ocean carried the cries of traders hawking pearls and sandalwood, and in the midst of them a man stood on an auction block. He was young, perhaps 20. His back gleamed with sweat, his wrists bound with leather dyed red to show purity of capture. The auctioneer called him Kafur, meaning camphor, something that burns clean and leaves no smoke. The bidding began with laughter. He was a eunuch after all, a broken body, a servant meant for women's quarters or accounts, not war. But as the bidders circled, one man from Delhi stopped and looked closer. He wasn't a merchant. He was a soldier of Alauddin Khilji, the new sultan of the north. When he looked into the captive's eyes, he didn't see submission. He saw calculation. By the end of that day, Malik Kafur was bought for 1,000 dinars, an absurd price for a slave, whispered the traders. But the man who paid it smiled and said, "Some things are cheaper when they have no tongue." Kafur's arrival in Delhi was like a ripple entering still water. The Khilji court was a nest of serpents, perfumed and venomous. Ministers plotted over chessboards, eunuchs whispered behind silk curtains, and the sultan's paranoia hung like incense in every room. Alauddin Khilji, once a conqueror, had begun to see betrayal in every glance. He trusted no one, except perhaps those who could not betray him. The chronicles say Kafur entered the palace as a gift. The sultan's first words upon seeing him, 1,000 dinars. Let us see if he's worth even one. But over the next months, something shifted. The eunuch spoke little, listened much. He learned how the sultan's voice faltered when he drank, how his temper cracked after victories, how loneliness could rot even the iron will of a king. In the evenings, Alauddin summoned him not for service, but for silence. They would sit in the courtyard as peacocks called across the dark gardens. "Tell me," the sultan once asked, "why do you not beg for favor as others do?" Kafur's reply was soft. "Because I already serve the only master worth pleasing. Fear." Fear, not loyalty, became his language. When rebellions rose in Gujarat and Devagiri, it was Kafur who led the sultan's armies, riding beneath banners of green and gold. Chronicles describe him as a man who fought as if his own breath offended him. The eunuch who could never sire a child left only corpses as his legacy. But it wasn't just skill that elevated him. It was precision. Kafur learned to wield obedience like a blade. In the sultan's council, where words could kill faster than swords, he spoke only when silence would be more dangerous. And slowly, the empire's generals began to realize something terrifying. The slave was no longer obeying orders. He was writing them. Alauddin's letters from this period grow erratic. His seals are smudged, his handwriting wild. Some historians call it madness brought on by paranoia or poison, but others whisper of another possibility, that Malik Kafur, now his most trusted confidant, had become the filter through which the sultan saw the world. If a general displeased Kafur, the sultan's wrath followed. If a province rebelled, Kafur's troops burned it before reports could reach Delhi. Even the palace poets began to notice. One wrote, "The moon no longer rises unless the sun commands it." They meant the sultan, but they feared the slave who stood behind him. The line between servant and master blurred in the flicker of oil lamps and the echo of execution orders. One night, during a victory banquet after the conquest of Warangal, Alauddin raised his goblet and said, "If God himself had sent me a weapon, it would be you." Kafur bowed, eyes lowered, and answered, "A weapon breaks when the hand trembles, Majesty." That night, witnesses say, the Sultan slept uneasily, and Kafur remained awake, standing at the foot of his bed like a sentinel carved from obsidian. What happens to a man when the only language he learns is obedience? When the only affection he receives is suspicion disguised as trust? The chronicles are silent, but the pattern is familiar. Every empire manufactures its own monsters, not born but forged in the furnace of proximity to power. By 1313, Kafur had become the de facto ruler of northern India. His campaigns reached the southern seas, his victories feeding Delhi's coffers with diamonds and slaves. Yet the higher he climbed, the quieter he became. The court began calling him Hazar Dinar Malik, the 1,000-dinar man. But beneath the title, a whisper persisted, the eunuch who commands kings. And perhaps that whisper reached Kafur himself. For in the rare moments when no one watched, he would stand before the Sultan's jeweled mirror, the one imported from Shiraz, polished so finely it reflected the candlelight like water. He would stare, motionless, as if trying to find the man who had once been sold for 1,000 coins. Then, perhaps, he realized the truth, that the reflection staring back was no longer his own. By the end of Alauddin's reign, the Sultan's mind was unraveling. Dreams of conspiracies bled into daylight. His sons plotted against him, his nobles recoiled, and through it all, Kafur remained. Patient, precise, unreadable. The chronicles end this chapter with a single, chilling line. And in the silence between his words, the Sultan began to hear his own death. The monster had been made. The mirror was ready, and in its reflection, the empire would soon see the face it deserved. The palace smelled of camphor and fear. The scent clung to the marble floors and drifted through corridors where even torches burned low, their light dimmed as if in mourning. Outside the Sultan's private chamber, eunuchs knelt barefoot, their foreheads pressed to the cold tiles. Inside, Malik Kafur stood at the bedside of a dying empire. Alauddin Khilji, conqueror of kingdoms and breaker of rebellions, now lay shivering beneath silk sheets, his breath shallow, his tongue cracked from fever. His once commanding eyes had sunk into darkness. The physicians murmured prayers instead of prescriptions. But above their whispers, one voice remained steady. Kafur's. "Majesty," he said, bowing close, "your sons conspire. Even now they bargain with generals for your crown. When you close your eyes, they will tear the throne apart." The Sultan blinked weakly, his lips trembling. "My sons." "Your sons," Kafur replied, his tone neither cruel nor kind. "They drink to your death. They call it freedom." Silence followed, a silence so deep it seemed to hum. In that stillness, the monster he had helped forge completed its work. Alauddin's gaze drifted toward the tense canopy, as if searching for the hand of God, but found only the shadow of the slave who had become his keeper. Kafur's words did not need to be many. Their venom was patience itself. He had learned long ago that power was not taken in daylight. It was inherited in the dark by those willing to whisper when others prayed. Beyond the chamber, Delhi Fort slept uneasily. Monsoon winds rattled the iron gates, and the peacocks that roamed the courtyards cried like mourning women. Somewhere in the barracks, chains clinked as soldiers shifted in restless sleep. And in the women's quarters, the princes, young, proud, unaware, dreamed of the throne they would never see again. As midnight deepened, Kafur left the Sultan's bedside and descended the spiral stairs toward the prison vaults. 2 guards followed, carrying bundles wrapped in linen. Inside them, iron rods glowed faintly, their tips red with heat. In the courtyard, a captain named Alp Khan stood waiting, one of the few still loyal to Alauddin's bloodline. "This is treachery," he hissed, gripping his sword. Kafur regarded him calmly. "It is obedience." The Sultan did not order this. Kafur stepped closer, his voice low. "The Sultan ordered peace. This is how peace is made." The captain hesitated, caught between duty and dread. When he finally lowered his sword, the knight accepted him as witness and accomplice. The first to be taken was Khizr Khan, the eldest prince. He was dragged from his chamber, still half asleep, his silk robes twisted around him like a shroud. "My father will kill you," he shouted, his voice cracking with youth and disbelief. "Your father," Kafur murmured, "is already listening from the grave." The iron hissed as it touched flesh. The smell of burning eyes filled the air, sweet, sickening, irreversible. The scream that followed did not echo. The walls of the fort seemed to swallow it whole. One by one, the princes were brought forth. Some begged. Some fought until their arms were broken. One, the youngest, said nothing, only wept silently as the heat neared his face. The eunuchs held him still, their expressions carved from stone. And through it all, Kafur remained motionless. His gaze did not flinch, his breath steady. When the last cry faded, he turned to the guards and said, "Seal the chambers. No mourning rites. The empire needs no heirs tonight." In the early hours before dawn, Alauddin Khalji died, unaware or perhaps unwilling to know what had been done in his name. His final word, witnesses claimed, was not a prayer but a question. "Who speaks?" It was Kafur who answered softly, "Your silence, Majesty." When the muezzins called the first prayer, the city of Delhi woke to rumors, whispers that the princes were gone, that the palace had wept without tears. The courtiers assembled in the Hall of 40, expecting orders from the Sultan's kin. Instead, they found Malik Kafur standing at the dais, his face illuminated by dawn's first light. He spoke with calm precision. "By decree of the late Sultan, I assume command until his chosen successor is prepared." No one challenged him. Fear had already chosen its ruler. The chroniclers wrote that for 3 days after Alauddin's death, the palace fountains ran dry, and the air reeked of oil and ash. Eunuchs were seen carrying bundles at dusk, cloth too heavy to be laundry, too small to be bodies. The royal women did not emerge. Even the peacocks grew silent. But in the corridors of power, life went on. Kafur presided over councils, signed decrees, commanded armies. He ruled as if he had always been meant to, a eunuch enthroned by ghosts. Still, power breeds its own kind of blindness. The generals who knelt before him did so with trembling hands, but their eyes held a spark that would not die. They waited, for weakness, for mistake, for vengeance. And in the stillness between those waiting breaths, the motif of Kafur's life returned. Silence. Not peace, but the soundlessness before collapse. One night, weeks after his ascension, he walked again through the same courtyard where the princes had screamed. The stones were clean now, the smell of iron washed away. Yet, as he passed, his footsteps echoed differently, hollow, uneven, as if the ground itself remembered. He paused, staring into the dark. "The living forget," he said to no one. "The stones never do." Far above him, in the Sultan's old chamber, a lamp flickered out. The wind moved through the lattice like a sigh. By dawn, the empire had no heirs, only ghosts and one man who believed himself untouchable. But every silence has an echo, and the echo was coming for him. Delhi wakes under a bruised dawn. The marble of the palace courtyard glistens, not with dew, but with something darker. Blood has dried in the seams of the stone, and every gust of wind stirs the iron scent of it. On the peacock throne, a child sits rigid, his feet barely touching the inlaid jewels at the base. His crown tilts slightly, the weight of empire pressing on a neck too small to bear it. Beside him, Malik Kafur stands silent, his expression serene. The slave who once polished armor now commands an empire of trembling men. The city beneath them breathes in fear. For 35 days, Delhi forgets the sound of laughter. The bazaars stay open only under the watch of soldiers whose eyes do not meet one another's. Courtiers move like ghosts through the corridors of Siri Fort, whispering prayers under their breath, unsure whether to fear God or Kafur more. Servants vanish overnight. Messengers gallop into the city and never leave. Those who return from the palace speak of muffled cries in the marble halls, of red footprints leading nowhere. Inside the harem, veiled women weep quietly for princes they'll never see again. One of them swears she heard music in the night, the haunting rhythm of anklets, the faint echo of royal children running through corridors that no longer exist. The guards laugh at her, too loudly, too quickly, and then grow silent again. In the throne room, Kafur's voice cuts through the silence like a blade. "The boy is the Sultan," he tells the nobles, his words heavy with false calm. "You will obey him." His hand rests lightly on the child's shoulder, but the gesture carries the weight of threat. Around him, men nod with trembling loyalty. They know the truth, that the child is a marionette, and the strings lead to the jeweled fingers of the eunuch standing at his side. Each decree that leaves the throne room is signed in a child's uneven script, but it is Kafur's will that bleeds through the ink. Taxes double overnight. Old allies of Alauddin Khilji are dragged through the streets. Their screams are drowned out by the beating of drums. A royal order for silence. Even the call to prayer feels subdued, as if the muezzins fear that their voices might carry too far. In the outer courtyards, rumors bloom like rot. They say the blinded princes still breathe, their eye sockets covered in gold silk, their chains clinking somewhere beneath the fort. They say their ghosts wander the corridors, whispering in the same tones Kafur once used to deceive their father. One night, a palace guard claims he saw a boy's reflection in a pool of stagnant water, a reflection that did not match his own face. By morning, that guard is gone. Kafur, meanwhile, grows quieter. Power has not sweetened him. It has hollowed him. He eats alone, surrounded by golden bowls and frightened servants. Some nights he sits awake until dawn, staring at the city through latticed windows, the sound of distant dogs howling below. Perhaps he hears the same whispers as the others. Perhaps he does not care. But even silence has a pulse, and his is running out. The same soldiers who once kissed his feet now watch him with hooded eyes. They remember the princes he blinded, the generals he executed, the mothers who cursed his name. Fear, once his weapon, begins to turn in his hand like a serpent biting its master. The rebellion begins without a sound. It starts in the kitchens, poisoned food untouched, servants slipping out under moonlight. Then the barracks, a sword unsheathed, a captain's whisper, a shared glance. Before dawn, the torches flare against the palace gates. Kafur wakes to the sound of boots echoing in the marble halls. The boy Sultan is already gone, spirited away by those who once called Kafur Lord. He does not flee. He walks to the throne room instead, robes trailing over the cold stone. The moonlight catches the silver of his hair, the curve of the dagger at his waist. When the soldiers burst in, he does not beg. "Did you think," he says softly, "that fear could be caged?" No one answers. The blade strikes once, clean and final. The man who ruled Delhi for 35 days falls where the Sultan once prayed. His blood spreads slowly, tracing the cracks in the marble like veins returning to the heart of the empire. Outside, dawn breaks again over Delhi. The birds return to the ramparts. The markets reopen. The people whisper of ghosts and curses, of how a slave dared to rule and paid the price for it. Some say his eyes remained open even in death, staring at the ceiling as if still plotting his next move. The boy Sultan grows into another puppet. The nobles who killed Kafur kill each other in turn. The empire, that magnificent beast of gold and terror, limps onward, And in the palace walls, the silence returns, patient, listening, alive. If you press your ear to the marble long enough, you can still hear it. The faint rhythm of chains, the sigh of a dying empire, and beneath it all, the echo of Malik Kafur's final breath, half curse, half confession. Because power never dies. It only waits for someone else to believe they can master the silence between words.